is Van Dracovin, Lord Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th Ed D&D. Alright, well, where we were last left off, we were diving into actually running your game and having it right there in front of you with some people. Granted, again, in this day and age, you don't always have to be physical to do these pen and paper games. You could technically play it online, but what we're talking about is establishing your table. Whether virtual or not, you're going to have to build a table. So, let's talk about an important aspect of building that table, your dice rolls. Because everybody at some point in time is going to want to roll dice. Establishing some rolls, especially if you have a physical table, can help make things go easily. There are certain rules you want to address. For example, you probably want everyone to roll in the open where everyone can see it. This is an important thing because you want to establish a level of trust between everyone. If everybody's rolling in secret, then are you fudging numbers on your own? And players shouldn't be fudging numbers anyway. You want everyone to see. Also, should people be like a roll scoop type people? I've met those types of people. Try to discourage them from saying this. Take a couple of minutes. Make sure you're getting the number correct. Don't just quickly scoop it up. Sometimes people make mistakes. Say things like that. You want to encourage them to take their time, but not kind of point them out on that and feel distrustworthy towards them. Because you don't want to say, like, I don't trust your dice rolls. It's more like, why don't you allow everyone else to also see your dice rolls? Because we all want to be able to see them and register them. You want to try to encourage group mentality a little bit here. There's also other certain rules you want to discuss. Dice on the floor. Do you let them lie where they stand? Do you want them to be re-rolled? Another one, cocked dice. Cocked dice are dice that have kind of hit some kind of niche or something and not quite fallen to one side. Now, you can establish that you'd always re-roll them. You could try to move something and see if they fall onto one of the sides. There's a lot of ways to look at how you handle any of these situations with dice when it comes to your players. But you as a dungeon master also have to look to how you roll dice, because that's an important one. You can very easily roll dice where everyone can see it, or you could roll them in hiding, behind a dungeon master screen. Both are valuable in a way, but I'm going to explain the various pros and cons of this entire setup. A little bit of how they work together. Why you would want to do one or the other. Big thing about you rolling in front of everybody, it's the easiest way to show you're impartial and not fudging rolls. Simple as that. That's the big pro of throwing it out in front of everyone where they can see it. Now, the first reason you'd have for doing it behind a screen, it will keep players guessing. If I'm rolling behind that screen and they're fighting something that's hitting them a lot, they could either assume it's a very powerful creature that they've gotten themselves in a fight with, or maybe I'm just getting lucky on my rolls. They don't know either way. It keeps them guessing. Also, I do have that option to fudge my rolls. Oftentimes, especially at lower levels, 2 criticals in a row might kill a character. Even at higher levels, that might kill a character. And you don't want to necessarily just kill off characters. You want to make it that it seems deadly, but it's the luck of the die can drive it to being even more deadly than you want. A little bit of luck? Okay, yeah, your players are getting nuked by the monsters. Overwhelmingly bad luck against them? No, you don't want to just... There are times and places for this kind of fudgery, but you don't want to reveal this kind of thing to your players. That's the thing, is you don't want them to feel like there isn't a danger to what's going on, or a favoritism, depending on the circumstances of these possible fudges. If it's the same character that's getting these heavy amounts of criticals, murdering them off repeatedly, you don't want to just be like seen being like, oh, I'm favoring them. No. So even when you use fudging, don't use it too often. This is something you will rarely do for important circumstances, not just because you don't like the dice roll. I might roll behind a screen to preserve mystery. Now, what does this mean? Well, if one of my players is like, there's an invisible foe around me, I'm going to make my wisdom perception check to see if I notice them. Okay. I could roll some kind of stealth behind here. Take my roll behind my screen, and the fact is, there might not have been anybody there. I'm rolling for nothing. The players might suspect that, oh, there really is something here. But they don't actually know that. Now, this is a trick which you really shouldn't use very often. But it's the concept of this trick and similar kind of rolls that add a level of mystery. Because they don't know what's going on, or if there is enemies, a couple of dice rolls here and there may throw them off because they don't know what you're rolling for. It could be something just very simple you're rolling for. It could be something that isn't an actual roll, or it could be an actual danger. There's 3 possibilities, and they don't know which it is. If it's just the circumstances they're walking into, actual enemy, or nothing. Now, the last reason that I might want to put it behind my screen, of course, is sometimes you don't want players to know what they roll. You'd roll for them. There are circumstances, which there's a very good example in the book, which I will share with you, that you might want to keep their roll hidden. If players suspect that a Baroness is charmed, and they're going to use insight to determine whether or not they're successful and figure this out, you have to think of it this way. If they roll, and they roll low, they personally, they might just say, oh, can't tell. If they roll really high, regardless of how their character's thinking, which again, their character probably will think, oh, not charmed, they as a player will be confident the Baroness is not charmed. This is a problem that we will try to discuss a little bit. This is a little bit of metagaming. But consider that regardless, their character will act as if this person isn't charmed, regardless if either way they failed, or they failed to detect anything on her with a low roll or a high roll. It's the same kind of attitude, except one, depending on the circumstances, they might not play it up as well, the low roll. You might want to hide that, so that you roll in secret and let them know she seems all right. She don't think she's charmed. Which in this case, they're not sure what they would have rolled on their own. So they have to be like, well, I guess she isn't. They have to think that she isn't then. It forces them to think in a certain way that you really want them to think because of the die roll, and keeps their characters in line with that. By setting up that little bit of blind to something like this, it works out in your favor more than theirs. But it also helps them to play up what their character would think. See? So, this should help you think about the times and a place for rolling behind a screen or in front of it. For yourself, also. Now, dice rolling. A lot of times, it's traditional that most players would roll attacks and then damage. Something important that you might want to consider for both yourself and your players is to take all the dice for this, roll them together. Roll attacks and damage together. It's a little step that traditional and older players might have a little trouble getting to, but it will speed things up significantly if they're rolling the two together. They can see if the attack hits. If it does, I've already rolled damage. I'm ready for it. If it misses, the dice roll is just a little extra roll. I had it all in my hand anyway. It's still one single roll of the dice. Now, another thing is rules discussion. And this is something that you're going to have to look to the group that you have around you with. There are some groups that once a dispute amongst the rules occur, they like to discuss it. They like to break it down between each other and figure it out and take a little extra time to hash out how this should work. There are other groups that will digress to you as the dungeon master to make a decision. Now, the nature of things here means that you personally might not want to make a decision right away anyway. You might want to wait to give a final ruling on this. You might want to make some kind of decision which will gloss over things right now. If you do that, and then you want to make a final ruling later on, make note of the discussion that was happening, or the problem with the rules that was happening. Basically, if you want to push things off till later, because you are going to have to discuss it, or rule on it later on then, probably after the session, talk to players about it, kind of things like that. It's a matter of something that rules problems will occur at some point in times in the mechanics of it, and somewhere along the way a decision has to be made, whether as a consensus of the group or by you personally. Now, let's talk about metagame thinking. Metagame thinking is a reaction to things in-game, the way that you as a person would play it, not as your character. That's the easiest way to think about it. It's like a good example that the game uses is players search a door. They don't find anything. But I, having read some flavor text off, describe the door slightly in detail. They think, out of game, hey guys, the flavor text was describing that door a lot. We should check it out again. This is not the correct thinking. They shouldn't think like this. It's a good thing for you to basically take this information and perhaps give them a gentle reminder of things like, would your characters think that? What would your characters think now? Using that helps bring people back away from metagaming, but metagaming is a problem that everyone faces and every player has to deal with. Sometimes you will know something that your character won't know. If you're facing a certain creature and you know its weaknesses, as you personally, because maybe you've fought against it before, but your character doesn't, you have to separate that out. And mastering separating out metagame information and mastering mitigating it as a dungeon master are two important skills. Both as player and dungeon master, you're all going to want to avoid as much as possible metagaming. But be careful about it, because sometimes people metagame not on purpose. People aren't out there to just cheat the system. They just make mistakes sometimes and don't think. They just act on their instinct, which might be relying on this instinct, not your character sheet instinct. Alright, missing players. Oh, it's a problem that you can face oftentimes. If you are still going to run a game session after you're missing one or so players, then you have to take into consideration a couple of different things, a couple of different ways of playing the game out. Because it can occur. You could still want to / need to play because of scheduling and be missing someone then. Well, first off, you could have another one of the players take control of that character. Now, they would have the character sheet. They would have to run it to the best of their ability, make sure to keep it alive, use its resources wisely. But they would be playing with two characters. You could easily just assign this out to anybody or see if there's someone that volunteers. You want to make sure you have permission, of course, from the person that controls that character or made that character before you do anything like this. Each decision, you're going to have to talk to the person that's being absent and discuss which you're comfortable with and what you want them to do. Now, you personally could also take over the character. That's something you can do as a dungeon master. It's a little extra work for you, but it might be something that will keep the character in the game, and that player will feel like you might be able to run them better. That's something because it's your game world, you've been established with it, you've been controlling the world around them, you've watched them play, so you using it possibly, extra work, but something to do. You could also have the character be absent for some reason. There could be small miniature adventures, side quests that they are personally on, something that you could come up with as an excuse for them not being there for that game session. But anytime you come up with an excuse, you want to have a reason for them to come back in afterwards. A good reason for them to rejoin the group after everything is said and done. Or even if, you get partially through the adventure, why would they pop in the middle of that? You're going to have to look to what the circumstances of them leaving is that you're coming up with, and then integrate that into the storyline you're using for them to possibly return at, anytime. And the last one is just fade into the background. Now, fade in the background is probably the easiest to do, but it's also the one that requires a level of disbelief from your players, because it is a little bit of reality breaking. Basically, you ignore the character. It's technically there, but not there. Think of it this way. The players get to a fight with monsters. Because this character does nothing, they ignore him. Leave him alone, do nothing to him, do nothing aggressive, no spells against him, no nothing. The character is still there, but just not involving themselves in anything. Again, that's probably the easiest technique, but it is one that does require a little bit of suspension of belief without coming up with excuses for it. Now, most of the time, your players will control one character. That's all they're going to have. But there are times when you have especially when you have very small groups that you might want one or two of your players, when you want some of your players to play, well, more than one characters to fill out your group. That is one way of doing things, but it isn't the only way if you want to increase the abilities of your group and make it closer to the standard 4 or 5. For one thing, you could very easily add NPC characters to the group. I could throw in 1 or 2 NPCs that would accompany the players. They would fight like the players. We don't want them to be as important as the players, but they fill the roles of combat and help mitigate some of the damage and abilities of the enemies around them. I could also add the Healing Surge options, which is a special options to characters you can throw in here. Optional kind of rule, put it in there. The fact is that playing multiple characters is difficult. It's sometimes hard enough playing one character and getting into that character's mind step, let alone a second one. And there are some people that won't want to do it. And you can't force it on them. And you can't just have one of all the group play 2 characters. You don't want to show favoritism or force that on someone unless, you're like, you guys need a 4th. Does one of you want to run an extra character? If one person alone wants to volunteer, guess what? You've taken care of the problem. One person wants to do it. You kind of put it on the group, see about that. There are ways to make multiple characters be a successful thing. But again, it's up to the players too, because they're going to have to deal with the circumstances of having multiple characters. It requires a lot of focus, and you don't want to get into awkward circumstances where a player is talking with themselves. I mean, you as the game master, doing a little bit of that, you're supposed to have a little bit of multiple personalities. Players, because they're supposed to be very individuals, they're supposed to be very well-built characters in the entire storyline you're building, a little bit of multiple personality just doesn't work out very well. Granted, a circumstance you could use is making one of these characters mentor to another. So the mentor character is the primary character, and the apprentice, one being taught, is the secondary character, but is still there and could still be useful, might be a technique to do it. Now there is another entire circumstance of type of game. If you are designing a game in which you are confident that players will die often, talk to your players about this. Talk to them about having that type of game, because all of you have to agree to play this type of game. If you are doing this game where character death is going to happen, and frequently, then each player should have 1 or 2 backup characters ready to fill in the gaps. Basically, if my character A dies, I have character B ready, and if B dies, I have character C ready, and I could throw that into the adventure as necessary. The exact details of how this entire thing will work out will be up to you to figure out, but that would be a reason to have multiple characters. In this case, whenever one of the characters levels up, they all level up. They effectively all are going to be the same, even though only really one is going to be diving into combats. It's just that when that one inevitably dies, you'll be ready to replace it with number 2, because number 2 will be ready and willing for action. But that's it for today. So, I went over some information that's going to help you run a smooth table. That's pretty much about it. It's going to help you make sure all the dice rolls are smooth, worry about things like keeping combat quick, and, of course, mitigate some of the problems that could occur. Things like metagaming missing players, or even not quite having enough characters. Dealing with all these problems and solving them successfully is one of the challenges of you as a dungeon master. But learning to do it right, and having it done correctly in your game, rewarding. Anyway, though, I hope you're having a great day. If you've actually set up any kind of basic rules different from any of these on your table that seem to work really well, let me know about it in the comments below. I'm always interested in seeing those little house rules that help you define your table and build it really interesting. Or if there's a circumstance I didn't talk about for one of these types of problems that you solved in an interesting way, That's a good one I'd love to learn about, too, from you as a dungeon master. Regardless, though, until the next time, I bid you farewell.